As educators, we encounter students in our classroom every day who bring unique strengths, weaknesses, and challenges to our classrooms. As Christian educators, we know that each child has been uniquely crafted by God in His image. Psalm 139 tells us that He is intimately acquainted with each one of us. So we know that our students have intrinsic value because they are God's creation. Now, we know that this value is existent even in spite of differences in race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, abilities. We are all equal in God's eyes. Neurodiversity seeks to create the same attitude of equality that we see in racial equality or gender equality for neurological differences. So, children who have dyslexia, ADHD, autism, a learning disability, we are seeking to promote an environment where they are included and equally represented based on their strengths as their peers who may be neurologically typical. So the positive spin that neurodiversity brings to special education is focusing on students' strengths as opposed to their weaknesses or their disabilities. So for example, instead of viewing a child with dyslexia as being a bad reader, as being inattentive, or even as being dumb, someone who promotes neurodiversity in their classroom will look at that student and will say, wow, they are creative. They are able to think deeply about stories and texts that they hear, and they struggle with decoding and spelling. So instead of just focusing on their weaknesses and what they struggle with, a teacher seeking to promote neurodiversity in her classroom will focus on their strengths and will seek to develop their strengths so that the student will be successful as they mature and grow and one day enter the workforce. Neurodiversity is such a positive thing, such a positive concept and idea. The first step to having a school that is neurodiverse or sensitive to neurodiversity is to have inclusion classrooms. Now, inclusion education has been around for decades, and that means that students with special needs are not pulled from a general education classroom. They don't have their own special ed classroom. Instead, children with special needs are a part of a general education classroom, and they receive whatever need and whatever supports that they need through maybe a few pull-out instructions, or perhaps having a special educator or another professional push into the classroom and meet them where they are. An inclusion classroom model allows students with disabilities to have normal peer relationships, to be a part of typical school activities. It also means that the general education teacher now has a lot more challenges than a few decades ago. So a general education teacher has to be sensitive to the needs of the students in our classroom. And there will be many times where a general education teacher has to provide services that they may view as being a part of special education. And that's totally okay, because that allows general education teachers to grow in their knowledge of students and how students learn. It also allows for them to start implementing some practices in their classroom that are considered best practices for general education students as well. A few of the ways that we can support a classroom of neurodiversity is by, first of all, creating a strong classroom community. So even students who are neurologically typical should still feel valued in our classrooms, and their strengths should still be highlighted as we see them. One way that we can develop a strong classroom community is by having a time where we really focus on each other's strengths and building each other up. For many classrooms, this can come during the time that is considered the morning meeting. That's a model of starting off a typical classroom day with a greeting, with a share time, with a team building activity, and then a morning message. I have found in my classroom that implementing a morning meeting has allowed me to teach really great social skills such as eye contact, manners, how to respond to people's conversations. And these social skills are really helpful for my students who may struggle socially, and some of those students who may even be on the autism spectrum. However, during this time, we can also highlight each other's strengths. So we may have a time of compliments where we highlight a student and we give them compliments about things that they are really, really good at. And for students who struggle in school or students who have disabilities, the reinforcement of their peers and their teachers acknowledging their strengths could be the key to changing how they view themselves and how they view education as a whole. Another aspect to creating a strong classroom community is to educate our students about the differences that we have in their classroom. So even if a student is not specifically labeled with a special need, but perhaps they are suspected to have a special need, or perhaps they're just a unique learner, as everyone really is, we need to educate our students about the fact that each person's brain, each person's neurological makeup is completely unique, and there is no neurological makeup that is better than another. In fact, we need different types of thinkers, different types of learners in order for our world to successfully run and in order for things to improve. So educating our students about how their brain works is a crucial step. I teach first grade, and my students are aware that they have neurons, that they have synapses. They know that each person's brain is different because everyone has different experiences. And educating them about those things, I'm able to start a conversation and have a continuing conversation all year long with them about how each person's unique makeup can provide different strengths to our classroom. When you do have a child in a classroom who is perhaps labeled with a special need, then that conversation is even more important. So when there's a child who has ADHD and they need certain accommodations, they need perhaps a seat or a seating arrangement that allows for additional movement for them, that conversation needs to be had with the class, that each person needs different things, and that everyone having exactly the same does not necessarily mean that that's fair. The equal is not always fair, and fair is not always equal. So educating our students about neurological differences is very important. This can also occur when we educate students about famous people or really important people in history who have neurological differences, as is the case for a lot of people who made great impacts in the world. For example, Albert Einstein is suspected to have had ADHD. There are countless successful business people who have dyslexia, and educating our students about that can help them know that, first of all, the ones who maybe have that disability can be successful, and it can give them a goal to work towards. It can also show our general students, our neurologically typical students, that these differences in people's brains are needed for our world to continue as it does. Willis, in the book Brain Friendly Strategies, Willis gives teachers a lot of different strategies to use in their classroom in order to promote neurodiversity. And one of the things that Willis really emphasizes is making information relevant and meaningful. So this means that for many students, they need to have information that connects to their prior experiences and is relevant. So rote memory of skills in isolation has been shown to not be the most effective way to teach. In fact, it's the least effective way to learn. However, when we can connect to students' prior knowledge and experiences, then that's a much more efficient way for the brain to learn new information. So Willis states that these links to existing neural networks, they can be processed more efficiently. And if students can relate to new material, then they're going to be able to process it, and eventually memorize and learn it much more efficiently than if they are just asked to learn the material in isolation by rote memorization. So ways that we can make these connections, we can have realia, a real object for the students to look at and to make a connection with. For example, when we teach students about sounding out words, I often have a slinky with me that shows how we stretch out a sound, and having that slinky physically in my hand is very engaging for my students who struggle with attention. And it also provides a concrete example for students who have a hard time thinking concretely. Now, as I mentioned before, these practices that we use with students with special needs usually benefit all students. And so being a classroom teacher who is well versed in strategies for special education will probably help you be a better classroom teacher in general. Another way that we can connect to students' experiences is by stories, either imaginary stories or real life experiences, or experiences that many students have had, such as falling off of a bike, dropping something, things like that. Now, as we make information relevant and meaningful, we're creating an environment where all students can succeed. Other ways that we can encourage neurodiversity in our classroom is through STEM challenges or maker spaces. So a maker space is a designated area in a school or a classroom where students are encouraged to explore, to problem solve, to build, to create. Many times teachers will use these spaces for designated STEM challenges. In these spaces, students are rarely working individually. The goal is that they are learning to collaborate, to work as a team, to reach a certain goal, or to accomplish a certain challenge. So maker spaces, or like open-ended activities where students are having to work as a team, where they're having to incorporate a lot of ideas, organize a lot of thoughts, problem solve, that can be like the start of a horror film for a child with special needs, because some children aren't able to organize their thoughts. They're not able to organize steps and to think about how to solve a problem. For some students, maybe students with autism, the idea of having to work collaboratively to solve a problem is terrifying. Some students struggle with fine motor abilities, and so to build a tower out of popsicle sticks is beyond their scope of ability, or so they think. However, when we can intentionally pair students with other peers who can help them be successful, we find that we can really, really showcase students' strengths. So, for example, students with autism typically have a specific set of abilities. And this could be, for example, computer programming. So maybe a student with autism loves computer programming, knows everything there is about it, and for a challenge, a STEM challenge that the teacher is using in her classroom, the students need to program some software on an iPad to make something go. Now, this student with autism will be a really big asset to his team because he knows a ton about computer programming. And this can facilitate so much more than just creating a successful product. This allows that student to have a positive interaction with his peers. His peers can fully appreciate his abilities, and this is allowing him a safe space to be able to collaboratively work with others and work on some of the social weaknesses that he has. A student with ADHD is usually just an idea factory. They're just brimming with ideas and creativity and energy, and they can be a huge asset to a group when they're creating something. So if a teacher is intentional about putting a child with ADHD with a group of peers who can be successful in working with that student, then that student maybe they come up with this awesome idea for how to build a treehouse out of popsicle sticks and pipe cleaners and whatever with their group. Now, on their own, that child may become frustrated easily and maybe wouldn't be able to organize the steps to successfully build this treehouse. But when they're combined with students who are able to help them organize their thoughts, then they can see their idea brought to fruition. And again, this creates such a positive interaction with their peers as they see, hey, Susie, she blurts out a lot in class and she doesn't have a lot of self control and she moves around a lot, but man, she has such good ideas. And that allows our students to see strengths of their peers. The peer with a disability is able to see the strengths in themselves, and we as teachers are also able to see the strengths in our students. When we as teachers focus on our students' individual strengths instead of their weaknesses, when we look at disabilities as opportunities for growth and opportunities for unique assets in our classroom, then we can completely change how students see themselves, how the peers see the students. This can also really positively affect how parents see their child as well. So promoting neurodiversity and focusing on strengths in students is a key aspect of classroom education.